Thanks for joining me on this journey of joy, grief, and authenticity. My name is Hilarie Houghton, and this is my husband, Jamin, who has agreed to come on for a couple episodes to talk to us about some things that I can't really speak to. And one of them is losing a parent. So today we're going to talk a little bit about Gary Houghton, Jamin's dad, and Jamin's experience knowing his dad, loving his dad, and losing his dad. Okay, Jamin, so tell us a little bit about your dad. Tell us what kind of man he was, what kind of dad he was.
Dad was awesome. Like, I love my dad. He was a man's man, but he was also really kind and helpful. He was a hard worker, and I think a lot of the way that I work and the way that I do things, how I love to play golf, and a lot of the stuff I do comes from him, really. And he was just a really cool dad to have.
Y'all both worked together at a golf course, right?
Yeah, I started working there, and they asked me if I knew of anybody that needed a job, and I was like, well, if you know my dad played golf, he'd probably come do it. And so he came on the weekends, and we parked carts together, and
that's pretty fun.
Golf. Yeah.
I mean, very seldom could a guy say, yeah, I worked at a golf course with my dad, and it was fun. It was great.
Yeah. Well, and I had seniority, so that was good.
Yeah, he was a very kind man. He was a very generous man. He would take us, the whole family, even whenever I hadn't married into the family yet, and I was just, the girl on his arm. Even then, he would invite me to come along with the family to the state fair, and then once we did get married, we went on vacations, and it was not allowed for you to pay for anything, and it was always very thoughtful. And then also he was sweet at heart, and his mind was sweet, but he loved sweets, and he always bought us sweets. We always, as a family, would go get ice cream together or go to the Rocky Mountain Chocolate Factory or something like that on vacation. And so I just have really good memories of him being sweet and loving sweets. So I'm having to make assumptions here, but I'm assuming that losing a parent is a lot different because they've been a part of your life for your whole life. They've always been a part of your life, and in losing a child, you gave them life, and you brought them into the world. What are some of the similarities, though, to that? Even though it seems very different, I'm sure there must be some similarities or differences. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think the ways that it's the same is there's this kind of vacant spot where something used to be and where you were anticipating it still being. And so when you think about upcoming things or the things that you do, and now they're different, they've changed, and that can be difficult to deal with. It's hard to understand how to do Christmas or things like that that are a lot different. Some of the differences, I feel like when you lose a family member, like an older family member, one of you knows that they need to support the other one, because in this case, you felt the loss of my dad, but you knew that you had to be supportive of me, and I knew that I could count on you to support me through it. Whereas when you lose a child, there's nobody there that had more at stake. Yeah. And so, you don't, you want to be supportive of the other one, but you don't always know, if you have the capacity to be, and you don't always know if you can look to the other one for support, because you don't know what their capacity is that day. Yeah. It's just unique in that way, because there's not one of you sort of taking on that, like, I need to be supportive phase because you both lost, like, kind of equally, rather than, whereas, like, a parent, there's one of you that had more, like, more there.
Yeah. And in this instance, we both are, like, literally gauging each other every day as to what kind of support one person needs and how much can we give. I like the word capacity that you used. So, to my amazement, you spoke at both your dad's funeral and your daughter's funeral. And what was that like? What really motivated you to do that?
I just felt like with my dad's, I felt like there was a message that my dad would want conveyed, and he had struggled with cancer for a while, and so I had put some thought into what things would look like, and not that everyone should, but for myself, I think there's a level of responsibility to convey a message to all the people, and I think to some degree point people in the right direction of what to do, because a lot, like, everyone who's showing up at a funeral is showing up for you. They're not, they are showing up to memorialize and remember someone that they cared about, but what they're watching when they're there is you, to see how you are and how you're responding. And I think people take a lot of cues from that. And so that's an opportunity where you have sort of this captive audience to be able to say, like, hey, here's what I'm going to do with this, and here's what I think you should do with it.
Yeah, for sure. How has your relationship with God changed throughout the course of both of these losses?
I think when you go through hard things, it forces you out beyond your depth, beyond what you can kind of handle yourself, and you have to, at those points, you have to either press into God or turn completely away. I just heard a message from J.D. Greer where he talked about how could a loving God let bad things happen, let tragedy occur, and when you really consider it, and in the book of Job, when Job finally talks to God, and God basically walks him through, where were you when I created the cosmos? Do you understand how reproductive systems work? Do you know how this goes? Do you know how that goes? And God's really kind of telling Job, like, I'm a lot bigger than you. And so for God to be love, everything that he allows to happen is a loving thing. And we don't know that plan, and we try to think of God as being just a little bit bigger than us, and maybe if he'll, like, show us a little bit of his plan, then we'll understand. But he's so much bigger than us, we can't comprehend what he has going on, and he wants us in that space where we just trust him and press into him. When those things come along, it pushes you to a place where you have to completely trust God, so that when other stuff happens, it's not really significant. Like, there's a lot of days that come along and you go, this isn't my worst day.
Yeah.
And true. So I think that gives you a better understanding of how to do life and how to help others through life.
Yeah. I feel like I've had a lot of days where I'm like, is anybody dying? Okay, fine. It's gonna be okay.
Yeah, and I think it's in Job chapter 42 where he basically says, I knew who God was, but now I've seen him. And I think that's what tragedy does. That's what bad things do. If you press into God, you get to a deeper place than than you're able to without it.
Yeah. And we were really lucky to have been raised in Christian families and Christian homes where whenever, everything happened, I remember thinking this when everything happened with Hollis, just it's so much of it was instinct, and we just knew what the Lord would want us to do in certain moments. And because we knew what the Lord wanted, we knew what each other wanted to do. And so the synergy there was beautiful, and it was because the Lord was that connector, and we were able to just operate with what we know He would want us to do anyway. And that was really beautiful.
I think God's probably the only way that you can explain, after we got the final diagnosis and all the decisions that came of how long do you stay on life support, and well, if when we're moving her breathing tube comes out, do we put it back in, or all of those, I felt like there were 15 of those decisions that had to be made, and we were, like you said, we were in sync on in step on those, and I think that's God's provision.
For sure, yeah. So tell us a little bit about how you try to honor your father through your earthly father, not your heavenly father. How you try to honor your father in the way you live your life.
Well, I have a couple of physical things. I have a coin and a money clip, and I kind of alternate carrying those. They're things that he carried, and so I keep those with me to remember him and the stuff he taught me, and those kind of physical reminders. Being a son, you have your dad's last name, and you become, especially after you lose your father, you become sort of the representative of that side of the family, and you carry that, and I think that should mean a lot, and it does. So you try to comport yourself in a way that that your dad would be proud of, because that's what he ultimately that's what he raised you to do, so that you could be an influence on other people, and be a man and stand up for something.
Yeah. So give us some advice on how to support a son who has specifically lost a father.
I think just being with them, letting them, it's kind of a lot of the same things that you would do with any loss. So checking up on somebody, and being supporting of them, letting them talk about their dad. I think trying to replace their dad is the worst thing that you can do. That relationship is gone, and no other relationships are like that. So you can't replace that. And so I think it's important to recognize that there's a void there, and just talking about their dad, or asking about their dad, or just acknowledging that there's a hole there, because you know that someday there is going to be that void, and there's nothing else that you can really put there. So don't try to put anything else there. And I think when you can just recognize that there is that void, and that it's okay, and that it's always going to be there, but their dad was still significant.
Well, thank you, Jamin, for sharing about your dad. He's an amazing man. We love him. We miss him. And you are honoring him by talking about him today and allowing other people to remember him. I really believe that. So thank you guys for joining us on this journey of joy, grief, and authenticity. And stay tuned for another episode, maybe even with my husband again, or maybe with somebody else.